Alright there YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Another video on Old Red, our project 1983 Peterbilt 359. For those of you guys that have been following along, you know that in the end of the last video we went out to Minnesota and picked up this frame cutoff. Actually, technically it's not even cut off, it is a full frame rail, but it's gonna be a cutoff. And we're going to be stretching the frame on Old Red. For those of you guys that are a little confused about what we're actually doing here, you have to excuse the fact of how dirty my truck is here. I have to get it washed up here sometime. Next couple of days preferably. But you can see that I've got 3 axles in my drive axle group here. And this is a 12,000 pound steerable axle. And basically we're going to do the same thing on this truck. However, there's not enough room for one. Also, all the way back to the very first video, I pulled the fifth wheel off of this thing, and these frame rails underneath the fifth wheel are rotted out. You can actually see it's rusted right through right here, and it's very, very thin in this area. So the back part of these frame rails are shot. All the suspension bushings are shot. You know, this is kind of outdated technology here. So we're just going to cut this frame off somewhere right in here, and then we're going to cut that other frame that's on the other side there, and we're going to put them together and weld it up. And then in that process we're going to update all the suspension, all the bushings, the brakes, the hubs, the rear ends, all in one shot. And basically everything on the rear of this truck is going to be from a low mileage 2010 truck. So what we're trying to accomplish here, I think the very first thing I need to do is go ahead and get that cutoff rolled in the shop. I'm going to need to shorten it up a little bit just to make it a little more manageable to move around. Probably going to single the tires out. It's got dual aluminum Peterbilt rims on it and good tires, but we're going to go ahead and single that out, do some things just to make it a little bit easier to move around, and then we'll get the truck inside and go from there. Alright, so I've done a bit of measuring on things, and from the center line of the axle here to about the midway point on this bolt here is the same distance as on the other suspension to the 2 upper and lower bolts on the front bracket of the suspension. I also determined that the other truck is in fact a 240 wheelbase. I think I had previously said 244. And we're going to go for a maximum stretch of 280 inch wheelbase. We might even go just a little bit shorter than that. So I want to just cut this off longer than I need to start with, and then I'll shorten it up a little bit once we kind of get everything finalized and situated. That way, you know, in case something funky happens or, you know, whatever, I've got some material to work with. So I went ahead and I measured 48 inches from the front of that bracket to here, and that's where we're going to go ahead and make this cut. And then this is going to end up getting shortened up probably about 8 or 9 inches, possibly a little bit less, because I'll probably cut just ahead of the suspension brackets on the other rear end, so you know that might move it forward a couple of inches, but I want to leave it long for now and just kind of get a rough cut in here. I've got this measured and marked out square. It's the exact same place on both sides, and I'm just going to go ahead and freehand cut this with the plasma cutter. And we're probably going to end up taking this cross member out and reusing it. I'd like to put a cross member as well as a sleeve inside of the frame right across where it's cut. now first things first here, I think we need to go ahead and take this step, the air tank off the truck. We need to figure out what's what as far as lines that run through here and label them just to make it a little bit easier to figure out when we put this all back together. Then after that, we'll go ahead and get this thing on jack stands and start getting ready to cut it off. Alright, so all the air lines, tail light wiring, rear end temp sensors, all that stuff is all disconnected, put off to the side and marked. We don't have anything as far as wires or anything going between the frame rails here now. Next, I need to drop this drive shaft out, and I've got the back corner raised off the ground right now so that I can rotate it, but as you can see, this is the more pain in the butt style that has the screw-on caps on all four corners, so we're going to have to beat that out. Okay, so I basically got Old Red here ready to cut in half. Wanted to go over a few things with you guys here before we actually start cutting this. I've got all my cuts laid out, and I ended up laying this out quite a bit further forward than I anticipated. Basically, we're going to use all the frame that we had before, where I was planning on cutting it back at least 3 to 4 inches. Basically, I knew that this bracket for this air tank was a bit rusty. I didn't really realize it was rusty underneath it, so went ahead and moved our cut forward to get rid of that while we're here anyway. So I had cut the frame like 8 inches longer than I thought I'd need, and I ended up moving the cut about 8 inches further forward than I intended. Well, actually, I think I had planned on cutting it about here, and this is kind of the point I was measuring off of. So I've made a lot of notes. Come around, the other frame with the suspension dump sits several inches lower to the ground than this one does. Part of it's probably because it's got low profile tires on it, which I didn't really realize. But I've got measurements from the frame to the ground. I've got them both written on the frame just in case I rub it off on the ground, but I've got my measurements of the frame to the ground in several places. Because this floor is not 100% level, so I want to make sure that I raise the frame up to level to where the frame is now. I've got a couple of points to measure off of on the truck that I know are true. I've got my cut marked out on both sides of quadruple check, make sure that this is true. Now when I cut off the other rear end there, I was off on one side about a 1/16 of an inch. So one rail is about a 1/16 of an inch longer than the other one. So I'll need to kind of true that up a little bit before we put this together. I know the comments are probably already blowing up about doing a straight cut versus doing a cut like this and then like this, or like this and then over and then down, and all sorts of different ways you can do it. I don't necessarily know that one way is better than the other. This is the way that I'm going to do it because I want to try to minimize the amount of heat affected area. Now when you think about the forces that are being applied, your up and down forces are all carried by the flange. So the flange is most critical. You could actually cut triangles out of the center of this frame, and this frame would be just as strong as it is now. So your area across here is not that important in my opinion. Your most important area is across the flange down to about here. That's where all the weight on your frame is carried. And these frames flex and move around quite a bit when the truck's in operation. So I think having the more weld surface area, like a lot of people do, is actually more likely to cause cracks in the frame than doing a straight cut. So that's the way I'm gonna do it. If you think another way is better and you're gonna do your own, do it the way that you wanna do it. I've seen this done many different ways, and I've seen very few failures. We will also be putting an insert inside of this frame that's gonna be at least 2 feet to either side of the split. And then we're gonna put a cross member right on the cut as well. I don't know if I'll use that extra cross member that I got, or if I'll take that cross member that's there and move it forward a little bit. But we're gonna have an insert inside the frame that's bolted. We're also gonna have a cross member across the weld. So this is gonna be very strong. If you think that this is gonna break, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because if I end up getting a crack on this frame and repairing it, I will most definitely do a video on it. So I'm very confident that this is gonna be fine. I've talked to a lot of shops that do this every day, and they all said do a straight cut on it. And so that's the way I'm gonna do it. Now, as far as what we're gonna do for the drive shaft, we're gonna be so long, we're gonna need to go to a 3-piece drive shaft. We got a 2-piece drive shaft. We've got a carrier bearing here, and we've got another cross member right here. And this cross member is right kind of in the area where by the time I come down with an angle bracket off of this and kick it one way or another, I'll be able to get the same length as how far we're stretching this. So I'm gonna have a 3rd drive shaft built and hang another carrier bearing off of this cross member right here, and that's gonna take care of the drive shaft. And then we're gonna need to bevel these out and grind it down, make sure that everything's 200% true when we come in here at the grinder and bevel it. Then we need to get this rear end pulled out, get the new one pulled in, and get everything trued up on that one and start getting it into place to weld it together. All right, so the truck's now cut in half. You can see daylight through the frame on both sides. Now this side over here, either the truck dropped about 1/4 of an inch or the rear end came up about 1/4 of an inch. I had weight on both of my jack stands before I cut it, but that's why I took measurements of the frame to the ground on both sides. So if it was actually the truck that dropped rather than the rear end coming up, I can account for that in all of my other measurements. But we can basically roll this out and away now. I'm actually gonna go get the Bobcat and pull it completely out of the shop here. Alright, so it's all fitted up here now. I've got it tack welded in place. Took quite a bit of finagling to get this all lined up and everything exactly true. But we got her done. Basically, the big thing that screwed me up is the back corner of this truck had dropped about 1/4 of an inch when I cut the frame on that side. And I was thinking I could just lower my measurements on this side of the frame and it should all line up, and it wasn't lining up. And I spent literally a couple of hours trying to get this all to line up. I knew I was plumb here. This side would line right up, and I was square. Everything was square. Everything was fitting good, but I couldn't get the height on these ones to line up until it dawned on me to put a jack under here and raise this corner of the truck back up the 1/4 of an inch that it had dropped, and then it all went together. I need to do a little bit of grinding. A couple of these tack welds were a little on the cold side, and I need to feather the ends of the tacks out before I weld this up, but I'll weld it out probably a few inches at a time, jumping from side to side. Try not to overheat this too much. Alright, so there it is, all welded up. Might not necessarily be the prettiest Z-weave I've ever done in my life, but should be pretty good. I'm gonna dress that down a little bit, make it look a little bit prettier. The inside of the welds have pretty good penetration. Couple little spots, like right there, didn't quite get 100% penetration, so I'll probably just grind that out from the back side and weld that in. For the most part, I'm pretty happy with that, and I think I'm gonna call it a day here, and we're gonna be back on this here very soon. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe down below. Thank you. Have a great day.